I'm Stephen Carroll. Welcome to the virtual Crookwell Potato Festival International Kitchen, coming to you online this year for obvious reasons. And today, because we are in a Korean-inspired tea house, I have for you a Korean soup, which is made from potatoes, radishes, and seaweed, something quite unusual for the festival. So let's go through the things that we have. First of all, we have obviously the potatoes, and the ones that we've got are the Crookwell blush potato, and they're from Gary Cadwell. People can buy them from him. We then have, this is a Korean radish. It's very, very similar to the long white radish, the daikon, that comes from Japan, except this one has a green shoulder. And as it grows, it does move above the ground. Now, with this particular vegetable, you can use the tops as greens. And in this recipe, after it is peeled, that becomes part, the peel becomes part of the recipe as well. We have a mushroom, and we also have tofu. Now, this is what's called hard tofu. There's different grades you can get, but hard is used for this particular recipe. Now, tofu is the protein that comes from soybeans. People get worried about cooking it, how does it taste? But in point of fact, it has a very mild taste, but because it's so porous, it actually takes up all of the flavors that you put into it. So it becomes whatever you want it to become. Now, if you like firmer tofu, you can get firm tofu and freeze it, and that makes it slightly harder. This is what we've done here. But before you use tofu, it's really important to actually press it to remove the water. You just put a plate on top of it, and some of the potatoes would sit on top of that, and that would be enough for half an hour to press it, just in a bowl or in the sink. We then have our seaweed, and what we're using is dashi. Now, moving on to the stock that we're going to use for the soup, we have our seaweed, which is dried kelp. Now, when you buy this, it comes in sort of various sized little squares, and sometimes there'll be marks on them, but they're perfectly okay. You can use them as well. And what you do with that, they have obviously a very seaweedy smell. You don't actually eat them. They're used as a flavor. So that goes into our saucepan full of just ordinary cold water that's in there. And you can see from what I have here, they soak overnight, and this one becomes huge. So it will grow in size. Don't eat it, it's only there for a flavoring. We also will be using soy sauce, any soy sauce that you want to have, just from the local supermarket, and also sesame seed oil. That's what we'll be using. So we combine all of these together into a soup, and in Korea it would be traditionally served with perhaps rice and some kimchi and other side dishes to make it into a meal in itself. Potatoes have been used in Korean cooking for a very long time, and they originally were thought to be brought over from China. The main growing area for potatoes in Korea is 50 kilometers south of the demilitarized zone, which is the border with North Korea. Korea is unable to supply the demand that is there, so they import the rest of their potatoes, mostly from Australia. But now let's begin with our preparation. So I've removed the top of the radish, and as I said, you can keep those and use them as greens. And then I will peel the radish, and you can see that even though the top is green, it's only just the skin. And that also, unlike potatoes, isn't bitter or has a taste that you won't want to use. And we will be using all of those peels into our stock with the seaweed that we have there. Whilst we're waiting for the stock to boil, peel the mushroom, and sometimes people discard the stalk on the inside. But because this is going to be boiled as part of our stock, you don't need to do that, and that can be chopped too. So quite small bits. And it doesn't matter if your mushroom's a bit dried out, because they get more flavour that way. And in fact, you can use, if you wish, dried shiitake mushrooms, but they will need to be soaked overnight, and you can use that water as well, because that will have an intense mushroom flavour. So we're going to put these into our bowl, because we're going to add the soy sauce to them. And you can see here, just one of those little bowls. So it's not very much, but you don't need a lot with soy sauce because it's very flavoursome. Pour over the top, and from there, you then give it a bit of a mix, and use your fingers, because you give it a bit of a squeeze as well, because mushrooms are a bit spongy-like when they get this large. You can use small mushrooms, you can use whole mushrooms if you like, but we're just leaving, and then we leave that to soak, to absorb all of the flavours from the soy sauce until we're ready to use them for the next part. So the stock is now boiling through, and that's containing, as you remember, the water, the peelings from the radish, and also the seaweed, the kelp from there. So that's boiling. In another pan, we then start preparing the ingredients that we've got here. And we need some oil to begin with, and I'm using the traditional roasted sesame seed oil that is available from a lot of shops, most shops. That goes in, and the smell is wonderful with sesame seed oil when it's being roasted. And then we add the potatoes. Now, you'll notice with these potatoes, they are unpeeled. And that is because all of the nutrients, well, most of the nutrients, a lot of the nutrients, actually live just under the skin. So you want to wash them really well, brush them, and whilst they're under running water, and then chop them up into bite-sized pieces, because it's going to be a soup. We don't want people having to use a knife or a fork. Into bite-sized pieces, and it goes into our pan. Here, we're just going to fry them in the sesame seed oil until they're slightly coloured. And aren't they a wonderful yellow colour on the inside? A beautiful contrast with the white of the radish. I can smell the sesame oil now, and you might just be able to hear a little bit of a sizzle. All in, but we don't put in the tofu, which is the same bite size, or the mushrooms at the moment. So we'll give these a stir. Keep them moving, get them coated in the oil. And that's probably going to take about 5 or 6 minutes. So the potatoes and the radish have now gone a little translucent, not too long, just the 5 or 6 minutes, and the stock has reached boiling. And now we need to put that in there. But the most important thing is that we don't want the seaweed or the peel, the skin of the radish. So it's easier if you ladle, because then you can keep it away from the pot. When you soak the seaweed, it's going to have a sort of medicinal iodine, quite a strong flavour, quite a strong smell and flavour. Don't worry about that, because as soon as you heat it to boiling, that turns into a beautiful smell and flavour. But if you cook with seaweed, it still doesn't make it very edible. Remember, this is not the seaweed that is used for sushi that you can eat. This is purely for stock only. So we now have our potatoes and we have the radish in there with the seaweed stock. And we're going to turn that on to boil. So what we add now, at this point, are the mushrooms. And remember they've been soaked in the soy sauce. And all of the bite-sized tofu. Firm tofu will always hold its shape. And surprisingly, even though we're going to boil the mushrooms, they also stay in one piece if we don't disturb them too much. So I'll finish doing this and we'll let this boil away and I'll come back to you when it's finished. So we've had all of our ingredients boiling in the stock now, and that has taken 18-20 minutes to get through that. You want the potatoes and you want the radishes to be cooked but not mushy, so keep watching them towards the end. So now comes the time when we're going to taste. It smells wonderful. I can smell the sesame and the mushrooms and the soy. So make sure there's a little bit of everything in there. And enjoy that. Now, traditionally in Korea, that would be served as with every meal, plain white boiled rice. This is our Australian rice here. And also the traditional dish from Korea, which is kimchi, which is fermented cabbage, which again is easy to make at home. So enjoy.